My son drove my wife to her Parkinson's therapy appointment, then came home alone. I left Mom at the rehabilitation center, he said, dropping his keys on the table as if nothing had happened. His wife smirked. She belongs in a nursing home anyway. She's only holding this family back. They abandoned the woman who had stood beside me for more than 40 years because they wanted me to surrender my company and everything I had built. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I quietly called my lawyer. I only called my lawyer. 3 days later, my son walked into the boardroom and turned pale. If this story is already pulling at something in your chest, you're exactly who I made it for. Like this video and subscribe so you never miss what comes next. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Your city, your state, your country? I want to know. This story contains fictional elements woven in for depth and meaning. Any similarity to names or places is coincidental, but everything it's trying to tell you matters. The meeting had been going well until it wasn't. I was sitting at the head of the conference table on the 8th floor of the Callaway Freight Solutions building, looking out at the Charleston harbor, the way I always do when a client needs a moment to think. We had $13 million of contract renewal on the table. The procurement director from Columbia was reading the third page of our rate schedule with the focused expression of a man who wants a better deal but knows he isn't going to get one. My phone was face down beside my coffee cup. Eleanor had asked me once years ago to be present in rooms when I was in them. She said it like she was describing the weather. She said, "Martin, a room knows when you're only halfway in it." I had been putting my phone face down ever since. It rang through the leather case. The number was an 843 area code I didn't recognize. Charleston local. I excused myself and stepped into the hallway. "Mr. Callaway." The voice was a woman's, professional measured with the steadiness of someone who has delivered difficult information before. "My name is Patrice Monroe. I'm the charge nurse at Harborview Rehabilitation Center on James Island. I want to begin by telling you that your wife is safe and physically unharmed." I put my left hand flat against the wall. "She's been here since 10:15 this morning," Patrice continued. "It is now 1:22. We've been unable to reach your son. Mrs. Callaway asked us not to call you directly, but given the amount of time that has passed, I made the decision to reach out myself." "She asked you not to call me," I said. "She said, and I'm quoting exactly, 'Don't bother Martin during work hours. Derek will be back soon.'" I stood in that hallway for 3 full seconds. Down the corridor, someone was running a copy machine. The sound of it was very loud. "What did she say when you offered her lunch?" A brief pause. "She said her son had promised they'd go together when he got back." I thanked Patrice Monroe, hung up, walked back into the conference room, and told the procurement director I needed to reschedule. He shook my hand and said he hoped everything was all right. I said I was sure it would be the way you say things, when you are not sure at all. But standing in a conference room explaining your life to a man you see 4 times a year is not an option. I did not call Derek on the way to the elevator. I had his number pulled up before the doors opened. Then I put the phone in my pocket and stepped in. There are moments when you understand with a certainty that bypasses every instinct toward charity that what has happened is not an accident. I am 68 years old. I have sat across tables from men who were lying and men who were telling the truth, and I have learned that the difference is never in what they say. It is in what they don't explain. Derek had not called Harborview. Derek had not called me. Derek had left my wife sitting in a waiting room for 3 hours and had not at any point picked up a phone. There was no explanation for that, which required me to call him first. I crossed the James Island connector with the windows down. Eleanor always said I drove with the air conditioning too high, and somewhere in the last 4 years, I had started leaving the windows down, even when she wasn't in the car. The air smelled like salt water and cut grass. Eleanor had been inside that building for 3 hours and 17 minutes. She had declined lunch because she believed her son was coming back to take her. I pulled into the Harborview lot, turned off the engine, and sat for a moment with my hands still on the wheel. Then I got out of the car. At the end of the corridor past a set of double doors, I saw the row of blue institutional chairs along the window. Eleanor was sitting in the third chair from the left. Her hands were folded in her lap, the right one resting over the left, the way she does when she's managing the tremor. She was looking at the door. She was looking at the door the way a person looks at something they have been looking at for a very long time. She looked up the moment I walked through the double doors, not because I made a sound. Eleanor has always been able to locate me in a room before I find her some navigational instinct built over 41 years of marriage that I have never been able to explain. Her eyes found me across the waiting area, and the expression on her face was not relief, so much as the quiet settling of someone who had been holding something carefully for a very long time and was now finally allowed to set it down. She pushed herself up slowly from the chair, one hand on the armrest. By the time she was upright, I was already crossing the room. "I knew you'd come," she said. "I told Patrice you'd come as soon as you could get away." My throat tightened so fast it surprised me. I am not a man who cries easily, but standing there looking at my wife, her hair slightly flattened where she'd been resting her head against the wall, her hands trembling, their small, constant tremble, I felt the back of my eyes burn in a way I had to blink against hard. I took her hands in mine. They were cold. In May in South Carolina, her hands were cold. "How long have you been sitting in that chair?" I asked, even though I already knew. "Oh, not so long," she said, and she almost meant it. We sat together by the window. Patrice stepped forward after a moment. "She told everyone who checked on her that her son would be back soon," Patrice said. "She said it every time, right up until about 45 minutes ago." "What happened 45 minutes ago?" I asked. Eleanor answered before Patrice could. "I stopped saying it," she said, "because I'd run out of ways to believe it." The words hit me somewhere below the sternum. I put my arm around her shoulders and felt her lean into me by about half an inch, which is Eleanor's version of collapsing. In the car, I adjusted her seat before she got in, plugged in her phone 11%, which meant she'd been checking it all morning, and turned on the radio to the station she likes. Stevie Wonder came through the speakers. Eleanor looked out the window and said nothing, and I drove with both hands on the wheel and my jaw set, and my mind already 3 steps ahead. That evening, Derek arrived at 7:15. He let himself in with his key, walked into the kitchen, looked at his mother with studied concern, and said he was sorry. He launched into something about a vendor call and a scheduling conflict and a dead phone battery. Every sentence had a shape to it, the shape of something rehearsed. Eleanor listened. She nodded twice. Then Derek said the thing that turned everything cold. "Honestly, today kind of proved the point I've been wanting to bring up. Mom, I think you'd be better served somewhere more equipped to handle your needs. Magnolia Crest has a whole Parkinson's wing. I've already looked into it." The kitchen went very quiet. Eleanor's hand curled around her water glass. I looked at my son and felt something calcify in my chest. Not rage, not yet, but the cold, hard certainty of a man who has just understood that what happened today was not a mistake. It was a demonstration. I stood up, walked to the counter, opened the drawer beside the refrigerator. Inside was a business card I had been carrying in my wallet for 2 years without quite knowing why. I set it on the counter, face up. Raymond Holt, attorney at law, Holt, and Associates, Broad Street, Charleston. 4 words on the back written in pencil a long time ago. If it ever gets complicated. Eleanor was still asleep when I came downstairs at 5:45. I had been lying awake since 4, listening to her breathe, the way I have done more nights than I can count, since the diagnosis not out of fear exactly, but something adjacent to it. A vigil I never decided to keep and cannot seem to stop. Our kitchen faces east. In May, the early light comes through the window in long, flat bars that move across the floor as the sun climbs. I stood at the counter and watched the light move and thought about the business card where I had left it the night before. Raymond Holt, Broad Street. If it ever gets complicated. I had written those words 2 years ago after a conversation with Jerry Sims at the coffee shop on King Street, where we'd been meeting for going on 4 decades. Jerry had said, "Marty, that wife of his, I don't know what she's building, but she's building something." I had told him he was being uncharitable. He had given me the look he gives me when I'm being willfully slow. I thought about that look now. The company started in 1987 in a second-floor office on Meeting Street that cost $400 a month and smelled like the dry cleaning business below it. Eleanor kept the books, not because she had to. She had an economics degree from the College of Charleston. She kept the books because she understood, before I fully did, that in the early years of a company, the numbers aren't just accounting. They're the story the company tells itself about whether it's going to survive. She did not take a salary for the first 2 years. When I told her that wasn't right, she looked up from the ledger and said, "Martin, we're not at the paying ourselves stage yet. We're at the keeping the lights on stage. Let me know when we get there." We got there in 1991. I bought her a garnet bracelet from a jeweler on King Street. She wore it the next morning and didn't take it off for 6 years. Derek grew up in that office. He fell asleep on the sofa more than once, and I'd cover him with my sport coat and keep the phone calls quiet. He grew up watching things get built slowly with attention over time. Or I thought he did. Sabrina came into our lives 4 years ago. Sharp, precise, and she looked at Derek the way people look at something they've already decided to acquire. Eleanor noticed it before I did. In the car afterwards, she said, "Watch her hands, Martin. She touches everything like she's pricing it." I told Eleanor she was being uncharitable. She gave me the same look Jerry gives me. I called Jerry at 7:15. He picked up on the second ring. "How's Eleanor?" he asked. "She's upstairs." My voice cracked on the second word. I pressed my fist against the table until it stopped. "Jerry, I need to talk." I told him everything. Harbor View, the 3 hours and 17 minutes, the empty water bottle, the dead phone battery, Derek in my kitchen the night before, every sentence shaped like something rehearsed. By the time I finished, my coffee had gone cold. Jerry was quiet for 4 full seconds. Then he said the thing that cut through every charitable explanation I'd been constructing for 16 hours. "Marty, that boy didn't forget to come back. He chose not to." And the difference between those two things is the whole entire ball game. My chest caved in. Not because I didn't know it, but because hearing it said out loud by a man who has known my son since he was in a booster seat at my conference table made it real in a way my own private knowing had not. "So what are you going to do?" Jerry asked. I looked at the business card on the table. "I'm going to make a phone call," I said, "and I'm going to take my time and do it right." I heard Eleanor, then the soft, careful sound of her footsteps on the stairs, one hand on the railing, each step deliberate. The sound filled my throat with something I couldn't name. "She's coming downstairs," I told Jerry. "I'll call you later. Go make her coffee," he said, "right now." I was already at the counter with her cup before she reached the bottom step. I called Raymond Holt's office at 7:53 that morning, before Eleanor had finished her first cup of coffee, using my personal cell phone rather than the landline, and sitting in my car in the driveway rather than in the kitchen where Eleanor might hear. His assistant answered on the second ring. I gave my name. She put me on hold for less than 40 seconds, which told me Raymond had left instructions about my calls. "Martin." His voice came on the line with the particular quality it always has. Not warm exactly, but steady in a way that functions like warmth. Raymond Holt has been practicing law on Broad Street for 31 years, and he sounds like it. Not because he uses legal language when he doesn't have to, but because he has the cadence of a man who has learned to weigh words before releasing them. "I've been expecting you to call. Not this week specifically, but eventually." "You've been expecting me," I said. "I've been watching your family for 2 years, Martin. Not officially. Just the way you watch things when you know a man well enough to read the weather around him." A brief pause. I could hear him settling back in his chair, the old leather one he's had since he moved into the Broad Street office in 1993. "Tell me what happened." I told him. All of it. Harbor View. The full morning Eleanor had spent waiting alone, Patrice Monroe's phone call, Derek at the dinner table, Magnolia Crest, the Parkinson's wing with the excellent staff-to-patient ratio. I told it in order, and without editorializing the way I've learned to present information in business meetings, because I have found over the years that emotion is most effective when it arrives at the end of the facts, rather than tangled up inside them. Raymond listened without interrupting. I could hear his pen moving. He takes notes by hand, always has, because he says typed notes make lawyers lazy about listening. When I finished, he asked me 3 questions. "Has Eleanor been formally evaluated for cognitive capacity in the last 12 months? No. Her neurologist monitors the Parkinson's progression. There's been no reason to do a formal capacity evaluation. Has Derek or Sabrina ever mentioned the words guardianship or conservatorship in your presence?" I thought about it. Not directly. Derek used the phrase more equipped to handle her needs. Sabrina asked Eleanor's neurologist about long-term care planning options at an appointment 6 months ago. Eleanor mentioned it to me as an aside. Raymond's pen stopped moving. Sabrina attended Eleanor's neurology appointment. Eleanor mentioned she offered to drive her. I thought it was considerate at the time. All right, the pen started again. Last question. Does Derek have any existing legal authority over you, Eleanor, or the company? Any document you've signed in the last 2 years that grants him decision-making power? No, nothing. Good. Raymond let out a slow breath. Martin, I want to explain to you what I think is happening here, and I need you to listen to all of it before you respond, because some of it is going to make you angry, and I need you thinking clearly. Go ahead, I said. In South Carolina, if someone wants to place an adult in a care facility against that adult's wishes, or without their meaningful consent, they need to go through probate court and obtain what's called a limited guardianship. To get a judge to grant that, they need to demonstrate that the person lacks the capacity to make safe decisions for themselves. He paused to let that land. A woman with early-stage Parkinson's who is cognitively intact does not qualify. Eleanor, by everything you've described, is sharp as she has ever been. Her motor function is affected. Her mind is not. No legitimate court would grant guardianship over her on the basis of a Parkinson's diagnosis alone. And then what was Harborview for? I asked, even though I already felt the shape of the answer forming in my chest, like something cold. Evidence, Raymond said, and his voice had gone very flat and very careful. A documented incident in which Eleanor was found alone and disoriented at a medical facility, unable to reach her family, potentially confused about her situation. That kind of incident written up in a medical report, attached to a petition for limited guardianship, starts to build a picture. It doesn't win the case, but it opens the door. Another pause. The fact that Sabrina was at that neurology appointment 6 months ago tells me she was already researching Eleanor's condition. The fact that she drove Eleanor there tells me she was positioning herself as an involved family caregiver. These are not accidents, Martin. These are steps. My hand tightened around the phone so hard that my knuckles ached. I made myself loosen my grip one finger at a time. What do I do? I asked. First, we establish Eleanor's cognitive capacity formally and on the record. I want her evaluated by an independent neurologist, not her current doctor. Someone with no existing relationship to the family. A clean assessment with a signed letter. That becomes our foundation. He was speaking faster now, with the focused energy of a man who has identified a problem and is already solving it. Second, I want to review every contract Derek has signed on behalf of Callaway Freight in the last 14 months. Everyone. If he's been moving money or creating obligations without your direct authorization, I need to know. You think there's something there? I think Magnolia Crest has a Parkinson's wing with an excellent staff-to-patient ratio, Raymond said with a dryness that would have been funny under any other circumstances. And someone had to research that. People who research care facilities also tend to research other things. I want to know what else has been researched. Who does the contract review? I have a forensic accountant I've worked with for 15 years, Frank Delgado. Meticulous, discreet, and genuinely unpleasant to people who cook books, which is exactly the disposition you want in that role. A pause. I also want to bring in an investigator, man named Marcus Webb, ex-law enforcement, now private. He's done work for 3 of my corporate clients. He doesn't make noise, and he doesn't make mistakes. I stared out the windshield at the front of my house. The wisteria Eleanor planted along the iron fence was in full bloom, purple and extravagant in the morning light. She had planted it the spring after Derek was born because she said she wanted something alive and fast-growing to look at from the kitchen window. Raymond, I said, if I do this, if we bring in investigators and accountants and start pulling at threads, Derek is going to find out eventually. Yes, Raymond said simply. He is. And then what? And then whatever we've found will determine what happens next. His voice was even and unhurried, the voice of a man who has sat across from a great many difficult truths and learned not to flinch at them. Martin, I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. Ask. How far are you willing to go to protect Eleanor and the company you built together? The wisteria moved in a light breeze off the harbor. I thought about Eleanor at the kitchen counter this morning, both hands wrapped around her coffee cup, the tremor visible in her wrists, her eyes bright and clear and entirely her own. As far as it takes, I said. Every single inch. Raymond's chair creaked as he leaned forward. Then come to my office this afternoon. Use the parking on Chalmers Street, not the Broad Street lot. Come in the side entrance. Don't tell anyone you're coming, including your assistant. I said I understood. One more thing, he said before I could hang up. Whatever Derek says to you between now and when this is finished, however reasonable he sounds, however much he looks like your son, do not sign anything. Not a form, not a consent, not a sticky note with your name on it. Nothing? Understood, I said. Good. A pause, and then something shifted slightly in his voice. Not unprofessional, but human, the way Patrice Monroe had been human the day before. Martin, Eleanor is lucky to have someone who moves this fast. I looked at the wisteria on the fence and felt my throat tighten for the second time that morning. She built half of it, I said. I'm just returning the favor. Raymond called at 4:47 that afternoon. While I was sitting in the leather chair in my study, pretending to read a quarterly report, I had turned to the same page 3 times without absorbing a single number. Marcus has something, he said without preamble. I need you to hear it tonight. I drove to his office on Broad Street at 6, parked on Chalmers. The way he had instructed, came in through the side entrance, the way you do when you don't want to be seen doing something that has nothing wrong with it. Raymond was at his desk. A man I had not met before was sitting across from him, compact mid-40s, with the kind of stillness that ex-law enforcement people carry, even when they're sitting down, like they never fully stop scanning a room. Martin Calloway. Raymond said, "This is Marcus Webb." Marcus stood and shook my hand with a firm, brief grip. "Mr. Calloway, everything I'm about to tell you was obtained through entirely lawful means. Public records, a license, skip trace, and a direct inquiry to Magnolia Crest's administrative office using a cover identity I'm licensed to use in South Carolina." He held my eyes when he said it, the look of a man who understands that provenance matters as much as content. "Everything is clean." He opened a manila folder and turned it toward me. A reservation confirmation from Magnolia Crest, Memory and Care, North Charleston. The name at the top was Eleanor Ann Calloway. Date of reservation, April 28th. Deposit paid by credit card, $500. I read it twice. The date sat on the page the way certain numbers sit, not just as information, but as the answer to a question you had been afraid to ask. 2 weeks before, Harborview. 2 full weeks before Derek walked my wife into a rehabilitation center waiting room and drove away 32 minutes later, Sabrina had already paid $500 to put Eleanor somewhere else. "There's a notes field," Marcus said quietly. "I want to read it to you exactly as written." He cleared his throat. "Family is aligned on the need for placement. Husband may be resistant to the transition. Caller identified as daughter-in-law requests that initial contact from facility be directed to her rather than to the patient's spouse." The room dropped 3 degrees. I read the notes field again. Husband may be resistant. I was the husband. I was the resistance. Someone had called a memory care facility, given them my wife's name, paid $500, and specifically requested that the facility route all communications around me 2 weeks before Harborview. Who made the call? I asked, though the answer had already settled into my chest like something with weight. The admissions coordinator described the caller as a woman in her mid-30s, well-spoken, identified as the patient's daughter-in-law. Marcus closed the folder with the careful movements of a man who respects what's inside it. The call was made from a cell phone registered to Sabrina Ann Calloway. Raymond leaned forward. "Martin, I want to be precise about the legal significance. Placing a reservation and paying a deposit is not a crime in itself. Anyone can do that. What matters is the sequence. April 28th, the deposit. May 13th, Harborview. The notes field shows the caller anticipated resistance from you specifically and worked to route around you from the beginning." He paused. "That sequence tells a story, and stories like that change everything about how we respond." "It tells me this was planned," I said. "It tells us this was planned," Raymond agreed. "Which means nothing about what's happened has been spontaneous. Not Harborview, not Derek's visit to your dinner table, not the Magnolia Crest suggestion. All of it was in motion before any of it appeared in front of you. I drove home the long way, looping around the Lower Peninsula, to buy myself the extra minutes I needed to get my face in order before I walked through the front door. The harbor lights were reflecting broken and gold on the water below the bridge on East Bay. I sat in the driveway for a moment with the engine off, looking at the warm rectangle of Eleanor's reading lamp on the front walk, the same light I have been navigating around since 1987. She was still up. She was fine. Inside, I told her I'd had a late meeting. She looked at me over the top of her reading glasses with the expression she uses when she knows I'm managing something and has decided to let me manage it. 41 years. She has always known the difference between a secret and a process. She went back to her book without asking a question which cost her something, and which I have not forgotten. I could not sleep. At 2:15 in the morning, I went out to the back porch. The wisteria along the fence had closed for the night, the blooms folded in on themselves in the dark. The harbor beyond the rooftops was quiet except for the low, distant sound of a cargo vessel moving somewhere past Fort Sumter. Eleanor came out at 2:31. She moved carefully in the dark, one hand trailing along the railing, robe tied at the waist slippers on the flagstone. She pulled her chair close to mine, without asking why I was out there, without asking anything at all. She reached across the small table between us and placed her trembling hand over mine. Her hand was warm this time, not the cold hands from Harborview, warm and deliberate and completely steady in its intention, even when the muscles beneath the skin were not. "You're thinking hard enough that I can hear it from upstairs," she said. Her voice was soft, but fully awake. Eleanor does not do groggy. When she is up, she is up. "It's everything," I said. "It's all connected." She turned her head and looked at me in the dark with the sharpness that used to catch errors in a freight manifest at 11 o'clock at night after a full day of everything else. "Martin," she said, "I am not fragile. I want you to know that. Whatever it is, I can hear it when you're ready." My throat seized so fast and so completely that I had to press my lips together and look out at the dark water until the tightening passed. Because Eleanor had just told me she was not fragile and she was right. And she had been right every single day for 41 years. And 2 weeks ago, while she was sitting across from Sabrina at our kitchen table pouring tea for the woman, that same woman had called a memory care facility and told them her husband would be difficult about placing her there. I squeezed her hand. She squeezed back harder than her trembling hands suggested she could. My phone buzzed on the table between us. I turned the screen over. An email from Marcus Webb. Subject line, Voss Consulting, LLC, Delaware registration. "You need to see this." I turned the screen back down. "Go to sleep, Elle," I said. "I'll be up in a few minutes." She studied my face for a long moment, with the focused attention of a woman who has been reading me for 41 years. Then she stood, kissed the top of my head, the way she has done since we were 30, and went back inside without another word. I waited until I heard her footsteps on the stairs. Then I opened the email. Then I called my sister. Joyce picked up before the third ring, because Joyce Calloway has never, in 65 years, let a phone ring more than 3 times when she was awake, and she is always awake when something is wrong. "Martin," she said, immediately sharp and alert. "What happened?" "I need to talk," I said. "I'm sorry about the hour." "Don't be an idiot," Joyce said warmly. "Talk." I was still on the porch when the sun came up. Joyce had stayed on the phone with me for an hour and 20 minutes, which is Joyce's way of saying she loves you, without using those words in a context that might require you to cry. She had listened to everything Harborview Magnolia Crest, the deposit, the notes, field the sequence of it, and when I finished, she had been quiet for exactly 4 seconds before she said, "Martin, you need to understand something. That woman did not marry into your family. She came to work on it." I had told Joyce she might be right. "I am absolutely right," Joyce said, with the particular firmness of a woman who has been the youngest of 3 siblings and has spent 65 years making sure people take her seriously. "And you have been generous with that boy for so long that you forgot generous has a limit. You found the limit. Now you handle it." And basis bezingwin de barsi bikizaduri. We had hung up at 3:47 in the morning. I had not gone back to bed. Instead, I had sat on the porch until the light changed and the harbor went from black to gray to the particular shade of pewter. It turns in the early morning before the sun clears the buildings on East Bay Street, and I had read Marcus Webb's email 4 times until I understood what I was looking at. Voss Consulting LLC, registered in Wilmington, Delaware. Date of incorporation 11 months ago. Sole registered agent Nora Voss. Address on file, a suite number at a UPS store location in Wilmington that serves as a registered agent address for approximately 400 other companies, which is a perfectly legal arrangement in Delaware and also a very effective way to make a company look more substantial than it is. I was at Raymond's office by 8:15. Frank Delgado was already there. Frank was a compact man in his early 60s with reading glasses he wore low on his nose and a yellow legal pad that he had already half filled with handwritten notes by the time I arrived. He had the air of a man who finds other people's financial irregularities genuinely offensive on a personal level, the way some people are offended by bad grammar or poor table manners. Raymond had described him as meticulous and unpleasant to people who cook books. Within 4 minutes of meeting him, I understood that both of those things were understatements. I pulled every contract Derek Calloway signed on behalf of Calloway Freight Solutions in the last 14 months, Frank said, without waiting for pleasantries. He adjusted his reading glasses and turned the legal pad to face me. There are 3 contracts with Voss Consulting LLC. I want to walk you through each one. He walked me through each one. The first contract signed 8 months ago was for what was described as regional logistics network analysis. The scope of work was vague 4 pages of language that managed to say very little with great confidence, and the fee was $220,000 paid in 2 installments. Frank had pulled comparable market rates from 4 other logistics consulting firms operating in the Southeast. The average fee for equivalent work was $64,000. That's a markup of roughly 240% over market rate, Frank said, tapping the page with his pen. On its own, that's aggressive but arguably defensible. A company can charge what the market will bear. But look at the deliverable. He turned to a page behind the contract. It was blank. There is no deliverable on file, Frank said. No report, no analysis, no presentation, no email thread, no meeting notes. Nothing. Voss Consulting billed Calloway Freight $220,000 and produced no documented work product whatsoever. I felt the heat rise in my face and pressed it back down. Second contract. Frank continued with the relentless forward momentum of a man who has been saving the worst for last. Signed 6 months ago, supply chain optimization and consulting, fee $480,000. He paused to let that number settle. Market rate for equivalent scope approximately $110,000. Markup 336%. Deliverable on file 1 PowerPoint presentation, 14 slides, 11 of which are stock photography, and 3 of which contain data that Frank's team had already identified as publicly available from the Federal Reserve's logistics sector reports. They billed us nearly $500,000 for a PowerPoint with stock photos, I said. And publicly available data, Frank added with the tone of a man who wants credit for thoroughness. Yes. Third contract. He turned another page. Signed 3 days ago by Derek Calloway. Strategic Partnership Development. Fee $280,000. Wire transfer scheduled for this Friday. He looked up at me over his reading glasses. This one is different from the other 2 in one important respect. The total fee exceeds the $50,000 authorization limit in the limited power of attorney your attorney prepared. Derek did not have the legal authority to sign this contract. The room felt very still. He signed a contract he wasn't authorized to sign, I said. Correct, which means the contract is voidable, you can have it unwound. But the wire transfer is scheduled for Friday, and if the money moves before we act recovering, it becomes a federal matter. Frank set his pen down on the legal pad with a precise click. The total across all 3 contracts is $980,000. The money from the first 2 contracts, $700,000, has already been transferred to a TD bank account in Savannah, Georgia, in the name of Nora Voss personally. I stood up from my chair and walked to the window. Raymond's office looks out onto Broad Street, and the morning was fully underway, outside people walking to work. A delivery truck idling in front of the courthouse, a woman pushing a stroller past the ironwork gates of St. Michael's Church. The ordinary Tuesday morning of a city that had no idea what was happening in this room. Nora Voss, I said. Tell me about her. Marcus, who had been sitting quietly against the wall with his own notepad, spoke for the first time. Sabrina Calloway's maternal aunt, 53 years old, former bookkeeper for a real estate company in Savannah that closed in 2019. No prior business ownership on record. Voss Consulting LLC was incorporated 11 months ago, 3 months after Derek Calloway was given his first operational authority at Calloway Freight. The timing landed in my chest like a stone dropping into still water. Raymond, I said, turning from the window. The wire transfer Friday. Can we stop it? Raymond leaned forward. We have 2 options. First, I file for an emergency injunction in circuit court, which stops the transfer but reveals our hand immediately. Derek and Sabrina know we know, and anything they haven't moved yet gets moved fast. He paused. Second option, we let the transfer go through. We have the trail. We have Frank's analysis. We have the contract that exceeds the POA limit, which makes the transfer potentially fraudulent on its face. The money moving across state lines from South Carolina to Georgia makes this a matter of federal wire fraud jurisdiction under Title 18 of the United States Code. Meaning the FBI, I said. Meaning the FBI, Raymond confirmed, and federal prosecutors who tend to be considerably more motivated than county DAs when there's a clear paper trail and interstate money movement. I thought about Derek sitting at my dinner table 2 nights ago, delivering his explanation about the vendor call and the scheduling conflict and the dead phone battery. His face open and reasonable, every sentence shaped like a man being patient with an older father who doesn't quite understand how modern business works. "Let it go through," I said. Frank's eyebrows rose slightly. "You're certain?" "I've been running a freight company for 37 years, I said. "I know the difference between stopping a leak and documenting a flood. Document the flood." Frank picked his pen back up and made a note. Raymond nodded once. I drove home at noon, and Eleanor was in the garden on her hands and knees, pulling weeds from around the base of the rows of Sharon bush near the back fence, moving slowly and carefully, her gardening gloves dark with soil, entirely absorbed in the task in front of her. I stood at the back door and watched her for a moment. This woman who had not taken a salary for 2 years, so that a company could survive, who had kept the books by hand in that first office on Meeting Street, while the company was still deciding whether it would survive, who had been left sitting alone in a waiting room for 3 hours and 17 minutes, while someone paid a $500 deposit to put her in a memory care facility. She looked up and saw me in the doorway. Her face opened into the smile she's had since I first met her in 1980, the one that starts in her eyes before it reaches her mouth. "You're home early," she said. "I had a good morning," I said, which was not true and was also the truest thing I'd said all week. That afternoon, Derek sent me an email with the subject line, "Quick update on the Voss partnership. Things are moving well." I read it. I wrote back, "Good work, Derek, keep me posted." Then I forwarded both emails to Raymond and Frank and Marcus, and I closed my laptop and I went downstairs to help Eleanor make dinner. Raymond called Friday morning at 8:42, and I knew from the first syllable that what he had found was different from the contracts and the wire transfers. Those things had made me angry the way financial betrayal makes you angry. Hot focus directed at a specific number on a specific page. What he said next made me feel something colder, something that sat in the center of my chest and did not move. Marcus found email correspondence between Sabrina and a physician named Philip Crane. I'm going to read you portions of it. I was at my desk in the study. Downstairs, Eleanor had the radio on in the kitchen, a saxophone drifting up through the floorboards. I focused on that sound while Raymond read. Sabrina's first email described a 68-year-old male. She did not use my name. She called me the subject with cardiovascular stress, demanding caregiving responsibilities, and a pattern of emotional dysregulation that was becoming a concern to those closest to him. "Stop," I said. I pressed my hand flat against the desk and breathed the way Eleanor taught me years ago when she said I was going to give myself a heart attack if I didn't learn to manage my blood pressure with something other than stubbornness. In, out. The saxophone kept playing. "Keep going," I said. "Dr. Philip Crane, 61 years old. Solo practice in Mount Pleasant, never in the same room as me. No access to any medical history, had responded within 24 hours with enthusiasm. He described me as demonstrating indicators consistent with caregiver fatigue syndrome and early executive function decline. He offered for $3,000 to prepare a formal capacity assessment letter for use in legal proceedings. Sabrina had paid by credit card the same day. She built a paper version of me," I said when Raymond finished. "A version that's tired and confused and losing his grip. And she was going to walk it into a South Carolina probate court." "Yes," Raymond said, "which is why I've already scheduled you with Dr. Sandra Okafor at MUSC, Tuesday morning, 9 o'clock. She uses the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, a 30-point standardized tool used in clinical and legal settings nationwide. 26 and above is normal. Your score needs to be on record." He paused. "What Crane did violates the American Medical Association's Code of Ethics. A physician cannot offer a clinical opinion about someone they have never examined. If his letter is used in a guardianship proceeding, he faces medical board action and potential criminal exposure. So does anyone who submits it." Document all of it, I said. Already done. I called Jerry after I hung up. Not for advice, I was past needing advice. I called because there are things you can only say to someone who knew you before you knew yourself. I told him about the emails, about Dr. Crane, about the $3,000 letter and the paper version of Martin Calloway that Sabrina had been constructing in Mount Pleasant. Jerry listened without interrupting, which is unusual for him. When I finished, he said something that cut through every wall I had spent 68 years building. "Marty," he said, his voice rough, with something between anger and grief. "They didn't just want Eleanor out of the house. They wanted you out of your own name." My throat locked so completely that I had to set the phone down and press both hands against my eyes until the pressure eased. I picked up the phone. "I know," I said. "What happens next?" "Tuesday I go to MUSC and get a score on a piece of paper that proves I am exactly who I have always been," I said. "And then we finish this." "I'll be there when it's over," Jerry said, with the simple certainty of a man who has been saying exactly that for 40 years. The next morning, Derek called. Careful warmth. Coached tone. He asked how I was feeling, said he had some paperwork that might make things easier. "Come by the office Monday," I said. "Perfect," Derek said, with the bright satisfaction of a man who believes things are going exactly as planned. I hung up and looked out at the harbor and felt something harden behind my sternum into something that was not anger and was not grief and was not patience. It was certainty. Derek arrived at 2:15 on Monday, 12 minutes late, which is not like him. I taught him punctuality was a form of respect, and he absorbed it completely before the years, and the marriage turned him into a man who now arrived carrying a navy blue folder held slightly away from his body, the way you carry something you want to appear casual about. The 8th floor was quiet. Just the two of us, the harbor through the window, and the folder on the desk between us. "You look tired, Dad. Are you sleeping all right?" "I'm sleeping fine," I said. "What did you bring me?" He slid a document across the desk. 12 pages heavy, cream paper, silver clip, at the top left corner. The header read, "Durable Power of Attorney State of South Carolina." I read it the way I read every document in 37 years, slowly from the beginning, without skipping anything. It took 11 minutes. Derek crossed and uncrossed his legs twice, picked up my pen and set it back down. The document covered everything a durable POA can convey under South Carolina law, real property, financial accounts, business interests, and buried in Section 7, on page 9, full authority to execute transactions on behalf of Callaway Freight Solutions, including signing contracts and transferring assets. No expiration date, no dollar limit, no oversight provision. Full and immediate authority over everything I had built for 37 years, effective the moment I signed. "It's standard language, Dad. Raymond doesn't need to look at it." "Raymond looks at everything I sign," I said. "You've known that since you were old enough to understand what signing things means." His smile held for 2 seconds before something behind it shifted, not collapsed, just adjusted the way a building settles in, high wind without falling. He stood, buttoned his jacket, picked up the folder. At the door he stopped, turned back. And for one moment, just one, I saw something in his face that was not the calculated warmth. Something younger, the 8-year-old who used to fall asleep on the sofa in my office on Meeting Street. "Dad," he said, his voice quieter, less shaped. "I just want things to be easier for you. That's all this is." The ache in my chest pressed hard against my ribs. "I know, son," I said. I did not know. But it was the kindest available response to a moment I could not fix. Raymond had the replacement ready Tuesday morning. 4 pages. The limited power of attorney authorized Derek to sign contracts up to $50,000 per transaction, required copies filed with Raymond's office within 48 hours, included a conflict of interest clause voiding any transaction where Derek or his spouse held a financial interest in the counterparty, and an automatic revocation provision rendering the entire document null and void upon documented evidence of fraud. "He thinks he's getting something," Raymond said. "What he's actually getting is a documented trail of every transaction he executes and a conflict of interest clause that makes every Voss Consulting contract potentially recoverable. Will he notice the difference? He'll assume you negotiated it down. People who are confident they're winning tend to skim the fine print." I called Joyce that evening from the back porch. I told her about the folder section 7 and the expression on Derek's face at the door. When I got to that part, the unguarded moment, the quieter voice, the 8-year-old underneath Joyce made a sound that hurt to hear. "I am furious at him," she said, her voice rough. "I want to be absolutely clear that I am furious." She stopped. "But I also remember the kid who used to call me Aunt Joy and ask me to read the same book 6 times because he liked the ending." Her voice cracked, then steadied. "What she did to him is also a thing that happened. It doesn't excuse him, but it happened." I stared at the dark harbor for a long time. "You're the best man I know," Joyce said finally. "And I'm not just saying that because you're my brother." My throat seized so fast it took my breath. I looked up at the night sky and blinked hard. "Go to sleep, Joyce," I said when I could speak again. "Go be with Eleanor," she said. I went inside. Eleanor was reading her lamp, throwing its warm rectangle of light across the floor. She looked up, read my face the way she reads freight manifests, finding what was there without being told where to look. "Come sit with me," she said. I sat beside her. She leaned her head against my shoulder, her trembling hand warm and deliberate on my arm. That was enough. That has always been enough. Marcus sent the file at 6:41 in the morning, while I was on my second cup of coffee and Eleanor was still upstairs. Subject line, Harbor View Rehabilitation Center, exterior camera. May 13th. You need to watch this before anything else today. I opened my laptop at the kitchen table. A video clip 47 seconds pulled from the parking lot camera above Harborview's main entrance. One line beneath the attachment from Marcus obtained through formal written records requests submitted by Raymond's office directly to Harborview's legal department pursuant to the facility's standard records release protocol. Chain of custody fully documented, fully admissible. I pressed play. Timestamp 10:47:23. The image was gray and washed out the way security footage always is, but clear enough. The main entrance doors. A man in a dark jacket coming through them, with the unhurried stride of someone who has made a decision and is comfortable with it. He did not look back. He did not pause. He walked to a silver sedan in the second row, got in and drove away. The clip ended at 10:48:10. Eleanor had arrived at 10:15. Derek had been inside that building for 32 minutes. 32 minutes, and then he had walked out with that stride, the stride of a man who has already decided and driven away. I watched it 3 more times, not because I needed to, but because some part of me kept waiting for a different version, for him to stop, to turn back, to reach for his phone, some visible sign that leaving had cost him something. There was nothing, just the stride, the car door, the exit. I called Marcus at 7. "Chain of custody is fully documented," he said before I could ask. Raymond's office submitted the written records request Thursday morning. Harborview's legal department responded Friday afternoon. Every step is on paper. "I want a formal written statement from Patrice Monroe," I said, "signed and notarized, this afternoon, if possible." "I'll set it up," Marcus said. Patrice met me in a small conference room off the main corridor at 2 o'clock. She had the posture of a woman who has been delivering difficult information to families for 2 decades and has learned to carry it without letting it crush her. She folded her hands on the table and looked at me with the composed attention of someone who understands that what she is about to say may matter considerably in a room she will never see. I told her I needed her full account of May 13th in writing notarized for potential use in a legal proceeding. She nodded once. She did not look surprised. "In 22 years of rehabilitation medicine," she said, "I have seen families make genuinely difficult decisions about care decisions, from love, from exhaustion, from places I didn't fully understand. What I observed on May 13th was not any of those things." She looked at me steadily. "Your wife sat in that waiting area for 3 hours and 17 minutes. She asked my staff every 30 minutes whether her son had called. She declined lunch because her son had promised they would go together when he came back." Patrice's jaw tightened slightly. At approximately 1 o'clock, she stopped asking. One of my nurses checked on her. Mrs. Calloway said she had decided to stop counting the minutes because counting was not going to change the outcome. The room felt very small and very warm. I pressed my back teeth together and looked at the wall behind Patrice's shoulder until the burning behind my eyes eased enough to speak. "I made 2 clinical notes," Patrice continued. "The first at 1:22 when I decided to call you directly. The second at 2:47 documenting Mrs. Calloway's departure. She slid a printed page across the table, time-stamped, signed, credentialed. The second note states that she departed ambulatory-oriented and in good spirits. I added a personal observation that her composure reflected a woman of significant character, not a woman who failed to understand what had happened to her. I had to look at the wall again. Patrice's notary stamped the finished statement with the brisk efficiency of someone who takes each document seriously regardless of what it contains. Patrice handed me the manila envelope at the door. "Mr. Calloway," she said, "I want to ask you something. You don't have to answer. Go ahead. Is your wife all right?" "Not medically. I know her condition." She paused. "I mean, is she all right?" I thought about Eleanor in the garden on her hands and knees, gardening gloves dark with soil. Eleanor at her reading lamp, looking up when I came in and reading my face without being told what to look for. Eleanor at 2:30 in the morning, on the back porch placing her warm hand over mine without asking a single question. "She's the strongest person I know," I said. "She always has been." Patrice smiled small and real. "Good," she said. "Give her my regards." I drove home through James Island with the manila envelope on the passenger seat. Frank Delgado had called twice while I was inside. I called him back at the light on Folly Road. He picked up on the first ring. "Martin." His voice had the tight-clipped quality it gets when numbers have told him something he wishes they hadn't. "That third Voss contract, the $280,000 one. The wire transfer is confirmed for this Friday morning. And Martin, I've just completed the POA review. This contract exceeds the $50,000 authorization limit. He did not have the legal authority to sign it. The contract is voidable, and the wire transfer, if it completes, constitutes unauthorized disbursement, which under Title 18 combined with the interstate routing to Savannah, adds another layer to the federal wire fraud exposure." The light turned green. I drove through it with both hands on the wheel and my jaw set and something cold and absolutely certain settling behind my sternum. "Document it," I said. "All of it. Every number." "Already am," Frank said. Raymond called a meeting for 8 o'clock Thursday morning. Frank was already at the conference table when I arrived, his yellow legal pad open and his reading glasses on, which meant he had been there long enough to start working. Marcus Webb sat against the wall with his arms crossed, and the particular stillness of a man who has delivered bad news before and has learned to let the facts do the talking. Raymond closed the door and sat down. "We have 4 days," he said. "The wire transfer for the $280,000 Voss contract is scheduled for Friday morning. I want to talk through our options." Frank went first. He laid 3 pages of analysis on the table: the Voss contract breakdown, the transfer routing information, the TD bank account in Savannah registered to Nora Voss personally. He tapped the routing page with his pen. "The money moves from Callaway Freight's operating account in Charleston to a TD bank account in Savannah, Georgia. That is a transfer across state lines. Under Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 1343, any wire communication used to execute a fraudulent scheme across state lines constitutes federal wire fraud." He looked up at me over his reading glasses. "That is not a county matter. That is a Department of Justice matter." "Which means the FBI," I said. "Which means the FBI," Frank confirmed with the grim satisfaction of a man who has been waiting to say those words. "But only if the transfer completes. If we stop it now with an emergency injunction, we have a voided contract and a civil fraud claim. If we let it go through, we have completed wire fraud and interstate paper trail and a federal case." Raymond leaned forward. "Martin stopping this transfer requires me to file for an emergency injunction in circuit court by tomorrow morning. The moment I do that, Derek and Sabrina know that we know. Anything they haven't moved yet gets moved immediately. Anything they were planning accelerates." He paused. "Or we let the wire go. We already have the Voss contracts, Frank's analysis, the footage, Patrice Monroe's statement, the Magnolia Crest booking, the Dr. Crane emails. The $280,000 is one more document in a file that is already very full." I looked at the transfer routing page on the table, the account number, the routing number. $280,000 scheduled to leave my company on Friday morning and land in a personal bank account in Savannah, Georgia, belonging to Sabrina Calloway's aunt. "How much have they already taken?" I asked. Frank did not hesitate. $700,000 across the first 2 contracts. So the question is whether stopping $280,000 is worth losing the federal case. That is exactly the question, Raymond said. I thought about Frank's phrase, a Department of Justice matter. I thought about Derek at my office door on Monday, his voice going quieter, younger for just that one unguarded moment. I thought about Eleanor at 2:30 in the morning, on the back porch placing her warm hand over mine, without asking a single question. Let the wire go, I said. Frank's pen stopped moving. He looked at me. You're certain? I've been running a freight company for 37 years, I said. I know the difference between patching a leak and documenting a flood. We document the flood. I looked at Raymond. What do I need to do between now and the board meeting? Nothing that looks like anything, Raymond said. You go to work. You answer Derek's emails. You act like a man who is tired and grateful that his son is handling things. You give them no reason to accelerate. He paused. The board meeting is set for a week from Thursday. That gives us time to finish building the record. I met Jerry for coffee at 9:30 at the shop on King Street, where we have been meeting since Ronald Reagan was in office. He was already at the corner table with 2 cups waiting, which means he had arrived early, which means he knew from my voice on the phone the night before that this was not a casual cup of coffee. I sat down. I wrapped both hands around the cup. I looked at my oldest friend across a small table in a coffee shop on King Street in Charleston, South Carolina, and I said the thing I had not said to Raymond or Frank or Marcus or Joyce or anyone. Jerry, I said I am exhausted. Not the company, not the investigation, not the wire transfer, or the POA, or the Dr. Crane emails. The exhaustion of knowing something terrible about someone you love and having to carry it carefully and quietly and completely alone for 3 weeks, while that person sits across from you at dinner and sends you cheerful emails and calls to ask how you are sleeping. Jerry looked at me for a long moment. His eyes, which have always been more perceptive than his manner suggests, went very still. How much longer? He asked. 1 week, I said. Then it's done. And after, I looked down at my coffee cup. I don't know yet. I'll figure that out after. Jerry reached across the table and put his hand on my arm for exactly 3 seconds, the length of time that a man of his generation expresses something he considers too important for words. Then he picked up his own cup and said, You want me at the board meeting. I want you in the room, I said. Not as a participant, just in the room. I'll be there, he said. Same as always. I called Tom Reeves from the car on the way back to the office. Tom has been on the Callaway Freight Board for 19 years longer than anyone except the company itself. He is a man of very few words and very considered opinions, and when I told him I needed the conference room on Friday of the following week for a full board meeting with no advance agenda distributed, he was quiet for 4 seconds and then said, Martin, do you need me to know anything before Friday? I need you to trust me for 1 more week, I said. Another pause. I've trusted you for 19 years, he said. 1 more week is not a problem. I was back at my desk by 11. Marcus's email arrived at 11:47. The subject line was 7 words Sabrina Callaway Company email server. Look at this. I opened it. Marcus had written 3 sentences. Sabrina used her Callaway Freight email address to store and forward planning documents. Robert Haynes in your IT department provided the server archive under written authorization from Raymond as company owner request. The folder is labeled Exit Strategy D. I am attaching the contents. Read page 1 first. I opened the attachment. Page 1 was a document index, 47 files organized by category, contracts, communications, legal correspondence, a subfolder labeled D Documented Actions. Every document in the index that I could see from the first page had one thing in common. Every single one bore Derek Callaway's name. Not Sabrina's, not Nora's, not anyone else's. Derek's. I sat at my desk on the 8th floor of the building I had built and stared at a document index that told me with the clean, terrible clarity of a well-organized file that the woman my son had married had been building his case file against him from the very beginning. My phone rang. It was Marcus. You've seen it, he said. It was not a question. I've seen it, I said. Page 1 is the index, Marcus said. Page 2 is going to make you call Raymond. Page 3 is going to make you call Tom Reeves. A pause. I'm sorry, Martin. Don't be, I said. This is exactly what we needed. I hung up and sat very still and looked out at the Charleston harbor for a long time. And then I picked up the phone and called Raymond, and then I called Tom Reeves, and by the time I drove home that evening, the board meeting was set, and the trap was closed, and all that remained was the waiting. Raymond printed the folder contents that evening and drove them to my house himself. He did not call ahead. He simply appeared at the front door at 7:15, with a manila envelope thick enough that he held it with both hands, and when I let him in, he said, "I didn't want this on email," which told me everything I needed to know about what was inside before I opened it. We sat at the kitchen table. Eleanor was in the sitting room with her reading lamp on. I could hear the soft turn of a page every few minutes, which is the most comforting sound I know, and I focused on it while Raymond laid the printed documents across the table one by one. 47 files. Raymond had organized them into 4 categories, each separated by a colored tab. The first category was contracts. Every Voss consulting agreement that Derek had signed, printed with the signature pages on top. Derek's name, Derek's signature, Derek's date. Not Sabrina's name anywhere on any page. The second category was communications. Email threads between Derek and Nora Voss about payment schedules and wire routing. Text message screenshots. Marcus had obtained them through the company phone records since Derek used his Callaway freight device for the communications, in which Derek confirmed transfer amounts and discussed the Magnolia Crest timeline. Derek's words, Derek's phone, Derek's name in the sender field of every single message. The third category was the legal correspondence. The emails between Sabrina and Dr. Crane about the capacity assessment letter, the Magnolia Crest booking confirmation, a draft guardianship petition that Sabrina had downloaded from a South Carolina probate court template website and partially filled in with Eleanor's name in the patient field and Derek's name in the petitioner field, not Sabrina's name, Derek's. The fourth category was a single document that Raymond had placed last face down, which is something Raymond never does by accident. He turned it over. It was a handwritten note, 2 pages in Sabrina's handwriting. Marcus had found it in the folder, photographed it, and included it in the archive. The note was addressed to no one. It read like a list of contingencies, if this then that. If the guardianship petition succeeded, then the trust restructuring could proceed on this timeline. If the guardianship petition was challenged, then Derek's signed contracts and communications would demonstrate that he had acted independently and without her direction. If Derek was investigated, then her cooperation with authorities would be documented by the folder itself, which she intended to deliver voluntarily. She had written in the second paragraph of the second page a sentence that I read 3 times before I fully absorbed it. D does not know about this file. D believes we are aligned. If alignment breaks down, this file is my exit. I put the page down on the table. Raymond watched me. He did not speak because Raymond has learned over 31 years of practicing law that there are moments when speaking is the least useful thing a lawyer can do. "She was never planning to stay," I said. My voice came out flat and very quiet. "From the beginning, she was building the case against him from the moment she started building the case with him." "Yes," Raymond said. "Derek thinks they're partners." The word tasted wrong in my mouth. "He has no idea that the woman he's been listening to for 4 years has a folder on a company server with his name on every document and a note that calls him D and describes him as a contingency." Raymond nodded. I stood up from the table because I needed to move. I walked to the kitchen window and looked out at the dark garden, the wisteria invisible in the night, the harbor lights faint beyond the rooftops. My hands, when I pressed them against the counter's edge, were trembling, not the fine, constant tremor that Eleanor manages every day with such extraordinary grace, but the coarser tremor of a man who is holding something that is almost too heavy. I called Joyce. It was 8:30, not unreasonably late for my sister, who keeps the hours of someone who has never fully trusted night to take care of itself. She picked up before the second ring. "Martin, talk." I told her about the folder. I told her about the 4 categories and the colored tabs and Derek's name on every document. I told her about the handwritten note and the sentence that used the letter D and the phrase "my exit." Joyce was quiet for longer than usual when I finished. When she spoke, her voice had the rough, stripped quality it gets when she is genuinely shaken rather than merely concerned. "Martin," she said, "that woman walked into your family the way a contractor walks into a house she's been hired to renovate, except she was never going to renovate it. She was going to strip it down to the studs and sell the materials." A pause, and her voice cracked at the edge of the next sentence. "And she used your son to hold the sledgehammer." My chest caved in so completely that I had to grip the counter with both hands to stay upright. "I know," I said. "Does Derek know any of this?" "No." "God!" Joyce exhaled long and unsteady. "Martin, when this is over, and I know you have to finish it first, but when it's over, that boy is going to need someone. He's not going to know which way is up." "I know," I said again. It was the only honest answer I had. Dr. Sandra Okafor's letter arrived by secure email at 9:47 that night. Raymond forwarded it to me with a single line. "This is what we needed." The letter was 2 pages on MUS, C letterhead, signed and dated with Dr. Okafor's credentials and her clinic's contact information at the top. She had administered the Montreal Cognitive Assessment on Tuesday morning. The MOCA is a 30-point screening tool used in clinical and legal settings nationwide to evaluate memory, executive function, attention language, and visuospatial skills. A score of 26 or above is considered within normal range. My score was 29 out of 30. Dr. Okafor had written in the clinical summary section that I demonstrated no indicators of executive function decline, no signs of caregiver fatigue affecting cognitive performance, and full capacity for complex decision-making. She had noted in the final paragraph that the preliminary assessment letter, prepared by Dr. Philip Crane of Mount Pleasant, contained clinical conclusions that were, in her professional opinion, unsupported by any documented examination and inconsistent with the findings of her own standardized assessment. She had signed it with the unhurried confidence of a woman who has testified in 4 South Carolina counties and has never had her methodology challenged successfully. I read it twice. Then I forwarded it to Raymond Frank and Marcus with 3 words: added in. Tom Reeves came to the office Friday morning. He sat across from me for 90 minutes and listened to everything Harborview, Magnolia, Crestvoss, Consulting, Dr. Crane, the Limited POA, the wire transfer exit strategy, Dr. Okafor's letter. He did not interrupt once. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time, looking out the window at the harbor with the expression of a man who is recalibrating something fundamental. "Martin," he said finally, his voice low and absolutely steady, "I have sat on this board for 19 years. I have watched you build this company from a freight operation with 12 clients into what it is today. And I want you to know something." He looked at me directly. "Whatever you need from me on Friday, you have it, completely and without reservation." I nodded. My throat was too full to add anything to that. "One question," Tom said, standing to leave. "Does Eleanor know?" "Not yet," I said. "Soon." Tom picked up his jacket. At the door he paused in the way that people who choose their words carefully always pause before the words they have chosen, most carefully of all. "She built this company with you," he said. "She deserves to know before the room does." The door closed behind him. I looked out at the harbor for a long time after he left, and I knew he was right, and I knew what I had to do next. I was at my desk on the 8th floor at 6 o'clock Monday morning, 3 days before the board meeting, and the harbor outside was the color of pewter, and the building was empty, except for the security guard downstairs, who had nodded at me when I came through the lobby and did not ask why I was there so early, because he has worked the Monday morning shift for 11 years and has never once seen me come in late. Raymond arrived at 7, Frank at 7:15, Marcus at 7:30, Tom Reeves at 8 with a coffee carrier from the shop on Broad Street, and the focused expression of a man who has decided that whatever is about to happen, he intends to be useful. We spent 2 hours arranging the evidence and presentation order. Frank laid out the financial documentation, first the 3 Voss contracts, the wire transfer records, the TD bank account, trail to Savannah, the fee markup analysis with the market comparisons. He organized them with the methodical precision of a man who has spent 40 years making numbers, tell stories that juries and judges and board members could follow without a finance degree. Raymond placed the legal documents behind the financials, the Magnolia Crest booking with the notes field, Patrice Monroe's notarized statement, the camera footage timestamp, documentation, Dr. Crane's emails, alongside Dr. Okafor's counter letter, the draft guardianship petition with Derek's name in the petitioner field. Marcus added the exit strategy D documents last the folder index. The 4 categories the handwritten note with the sentence about D, not knowing about the exit. Tom Reeves looked at the complete arrangement on the conference table and was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Martin, In 19 years on this board, I have never seen a case built this thoroughly. He picked up the handwritten note and read it once, set it back down. She made one mistake. The company email, I said. The company email, Tom confirmed. Everything else she did was careful. That one thing was careless. And that one thing is what brought the whole structure down. Raymond looked up from his notes. Sabrina used the company email because it was right there, and she never imagined we would look, he said. Confidence makes people careless about the tools they reach for. We finished by 10. I sent Raymond, Frank, and Marcus home with instructions to rest because Thursday was going to be a long day. Tom stayed an extra few minutes standing at the window with his coffee looking out at the harbor. Martin, he said, without turning around. How are you holding up? I'm holding, I said. He nodded, still looking at the water. That's enough, he said simply. After he left, I sat alone in the conference room for 20 minutes. The evidence was organized in neat stacks on the table. The harbor was visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows, boats moving on the water, a container ship heading out toward Fort Sumter. I had looked out this window for 37 years, and it had never looked the same twice, and it did not look the same now. I drove home at noon. Eleanor was in the garden, moving between the raised beds with a small hand trowel, and the focused attention she brings to everything that requires patience. She was wearing her wide-brimmed hat, the straw one she bought in Savannah the summer before last, and her gardening gloves were already dark with soil. She did not hear me come through the back gate because she was talking quietly to the tomato plants, which is something she has done for 40 years and has never once been self-conscious about. "Elle," I said. She looked up. She read my face the way she always does, with the quick, intelligent attention of a woman who has been fluent in the language of my expressions since 1980. Something shifted in her eyes, not alarm, but recognition. The recognition of a woman who has known for 3 weeks that her husband has been carrying something heavy and has been waiting with the patience that defines her for him to be ready to set it down. "Come inside," she said, not a question. We sat at the kitchen table. Eleanor took off her gardening gloves and set them on the counter and washed her hands at the sink, drying them on the kitchen towel with the careful attention she gives to each small task since the diagnosis. Then she sat down across from me, folded her trembling hands on the table, and looked at me with eyes that were absolutely clear and completely prepared. "Tell me everything," she said, "all of it." So I did. I started at Harborview. I told her about the 32 minutes on the camera footage, about Derek's stride through the doors, about Patrice Monroe's notarized statement, and the part where Eleanor had decided to stop counting the minutes. I told her about Magnolia Crest and the deposit and the notes field and the phrase husband may be resistant. I told her about Voss Consulting and Nora Voss and the $700,000 already in Savannah and the $280,000 that had transferred on Friday. I told her about Dr. Crane and the $3,000 letter and the paper version of me that Sabrina had been constructing. I told her about Exit Strategy D and the handwritten note and the sentence that called our son D and described him as a contingency. Eleanor listened to all of it without moving. Her hands stayed folded on the table. Her eyes stayed on my face. She did not cry, and she did not interrupt, and she did not flinch, and watching her absorb it, watching this woman, who has Parkinson's and a tremor in her hands and walks carefully on stairs, receive the full weight of what our son and his wife had been building, was the hardest thing I had done in the 3 weeks since Harborview. When I finished, the kitchen was very quiet. Eleanor looked down at her folded hands. She turned them over and looked at her palms the way she sometimes does when she is locating herself in her own body. Then she looked back up at me, and her eyes were bright and fierce and burning, with something that was not grief and was not rage, but contained the concentrated essence of both. "Derek let her use him," she said. Her voice was low and very steady. "He let her walk into this family and use him like an instrument, and he was too proud, or too blind, or too much in love to see it." She stopped, drew a breath, and I sat in that waiting room for 3 hours and 17 minutes, believing my son was coming back. Her voice broke on the last 3 words, not a crack, a fracture deep and sudden, the sound of something that had been held together by will alone finally giving way. Her eyes filled and overflowed, and she pressed her lips together hard and looked at the ceiling. I reached across the table and took both her hands in mine. They shook against my palms. "Eleanor," I said, "don't." Her voice was fierce through the tears, fierce and clear and entirely her. "Don't comfort me yet. Let me be angry first. I have earned the right to be angry first. So I held her hands and I let her be angry, and she cried in the way she rarely cries, without restraint, without management, her shoulders shaking and her breath coming in the uneven waves, and I sat across from her and held on and did not say a single word because she had asked me not to, and because she was right, and because 41 years had taught me that Eleanor Calloway knows exactly what she needs and exactly when she needs it. When the tears slowed, she squeezed my hands, hard, harder than I expected from hands that tremble. "Martin," she said, her voice raw and rebuilt, "don't you dare be gentle with them." Eleanor was already dressed when I came downstairs Tuesday morning. She had asked me the night before, after I told her everything, whether she could be evaluated as well, not because she doubted herself, but because she wanted her name on paper beside mine. Not dressed the way she dresses for her regular day gardening clothes, comfortable shoes, the soft fabric she has gravitated towards since the diagnosis. She was wearing the navy blazer she bought on King Street 2 years ago, and her good pearl earrings and the garnet bracelet on her left wrist. And she was standing at the kitchen counter drinking her coffee with the upright posture of a woman who has decided that today requires her best self, and has summoned it accordingly. "I looked up Dr. Okafor last night," Eleanor said when I walked in. "She has published 41 peer-reviewed papers on neurocognitive assessment. She testified before the South Carolina Senate Health Committee in 2021 on capacity evaluation standards." She set her coffee cup down with a precise click. "I want her to know that the woman she is evaluating today is not confused about what is happening or why she is there." My heart expanded in my chest so suddenly and so completely that I had to look away for a moment out the kitchen window at the garden to collect myself. "Elle," I said. "Don't," she said, but gently this time, with the small smile she reserves for moments when I am about to say something she has already thought of and moved past. "I cried yesterday. That's done. Today we work." The drive to MUSC took 22 minutes. Eleanor sat in the passenger seat with her hands folded in her lap, the tremor visible as always in the fine movement of her fingers, and looked out the window at the city moving past. James Island, the bridge, the medical district on Ashley Avenue. She named the streets quietly as we passed them, not for my benefit but for her own, the way she has always located herself in physical space when she is managing something large internally. "Martin," she said when we were stopped at the light on Rutledge Avenue, "I want to ask you something, and I need an honest answer." "Always," I said. "Did you know from the beginning, from Harborview? Did you know immediately what it was?" I thought about the 8 seconds I had looked at Derek across the dinner table, the daytime card in the drawer, the specific quality of the certainty that had settled into me before I had consciously formed the thought. "Yes," I said. Eleanor nodded slowly. "And you carried it alone for 3 weeks to protect me." "To protect us," I said. "I needed the evidence first. I needed to be certain before I said it out loud." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Next time," she said, her voice firm and unhurried, "you tell me sooner, whatever it is. I am not made of glass, Martin. I have never been made of glass, and I need you to stop treating me like I might be." The light changed. I drove through it with both hands on the wheel and the rebuke sitting in my chest, where it belonged, warm and right and entirely fair. "Understood," I said. Dr. Sandra Okafor was a woman in her late 40s with close-cropped natural hair and the composed, unhurried manner of someone who has spent 20 years in rooms where panic is not useful. She shook Eleanor's hand first, which I noticed, and she spoke to Eleanor directly throughout the intake process, without looking to me for confirmation, which I also noticed and which told me everything I needed to know about her. The assessment took 40 minutes. I waited in the corridor outside, in a chair beside a window that looked out onto the Ashley River, and I watched a brown pelican ride a thermal above the water and thought about Eleanor inside that room, sitting across from a woman with 41 peer-reviewed papers, answering questions with the precise and unrattled intelligence she has brought to every hard thing in her life. Dr. Okafor came out first. She walked to where I was sitting and said quietly and without preamble, "Mr. Calloway, your wife scored 28 out of 30 on the Montreal Cognitive Assessment. That places her well within normal range. Her Parkinson's affects her motor function. It does not affect her mind. She has full legal capacity, and I will state that unequivocally in my letter." "Thank you," I said. "One more thing." Dr. Okafor looked at me directly. Mrs. Calloway told me at the end of the session that she wanted me to know she was aware of why the evaluation was being conducted and that she supported it completely. A pause. In 20 years of practice, Mr. Calloway, I have never had a patient say that to me. It is not a small thing. Eleanor came out a few minutes later, moving with the careful deliberateness that is hers now, and her pearl earrings were still perfectly in place, and her blazer was still straight, and her eyes were bright and focused and completely undimmed. 28, she said before I could ask. 28? I confirmed. She nodded satisfied the way she used to nod when the quarterly numbers came in where she had projected them. Good, she said. Let's go home. In the car at the light on Rutledge Avenue heading back, Eleanor said, "What happens Thursday?" I told her the structure of the board meeting, the evidence in order, the 4 categories. Tom Reeves in the room, Jerry in the corner, Raymond with the packets, Frank with the financials. What would happen when Derek opened his folder and saw page 1? What would happen when Sabrina saw exit strategy D on the screen? Eleanor listened to all of it with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes forward. And after, she said, Derek loses his operational authority. The DA gets Frank's audit report. The federal wire fraud case builds from the transfer records. Nora Voss faces federal exposure. Sabrina faces conspiracy charges. I paused. And I rebuild the trust structure so that none of this can happen again. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Will Derek go to prison?" I had been waiting for that question. "That depends on how much he cooperates with the investigation," I said carefully. Raymond believes that if he cooperates fully and immediately, the DA will focus prosecution on Sabrina and Nora Voss. Derek's culpability is real, but his role was more instrument than architect. She absorbed that. Her jaw worked slightly the way it does when she is processing something painful. "He's still my son," she said, not a defense. Just a fact stated plainly the way Eleanor states all facts. "I know," I said. "He is." My phone buzzed in the cup holder between us. I glanced at the screen. Marcus Webb. I put it on speaker. "Marcus?" "Nora Voss landed at Charleston International 40 minutes ago," Marcus said. "Sabrina called her yesterday morning. I have the call duration 6 minutes. Nora checked into the hotel on King Street. She does not know she's being watched." "Does she know about the board meeting?" I asked. Based on the call timing, I believe Sabrina told her the board meeting was happening and that she needed backup for the aftermath, Marcus said. "Nora thinks she's flying in to help manage a family dispute. She has no idea what's actually waiting for her." Eleanor looked at me from the passenger seat. Her expression was clear and steady and entirely composed. "Good," she said to Marcus, to me, to the windshield, to all of it. "Let her come." That evening I sat at the kitchen table with a single sheet of paper and a pen and wrote by hand every contribution Eleanor had made to Callaway Freight Solutions in the first 7 years of the company's life. The freight manifests she had checked by hand. The clients she had called herself when I was on the road. The year she had renegotiated our insurance rates and saved us $40,000. The 2 years she had worked without salary so the company could survive. I wrote it all down. I folded the paper and put it in my jacket pocket. I intended to read it out loud before Thursday was over. I woke at 4:45 on Thursday morning and did not try to go back to sleep. Eleanor was breathing evenly beside me, her face relaxed in the particular way it only is when she is deeply under, and I lay still for a few minutes, listening to her breathe, the way I have done on difficult mornings for 41 years, letting the sound of it anchor me before I moved. Then I got up carefully, pulled on my clothes in the dark, and went downstairs. The harbor was black outside the kitchen window. The lights on the Cooper River bridges were still on their reflections, broken, and gold on the water below. I made coffee and stood at the counter and held the cup with both hands and thought about the day that was coming, the way you think about a door you have been walking toward for a long time and are finally about to open. I took the folded paper from my jacket pocket, the list I had written Tuesday night at the kitchen table, Eleanor's name at the top, 31 years of contributions beneath it, handwritten in the careful print I use when I want to be sure the words are legible, because they matter. I read it once in the dark kitchen with the harbor lights reflecting through the window. Then I put it back in my pocket and went to get dressed. Jerry arrived at 6:30 in his old Buick idling at the curb in front of the house on East Battery. The way he has idled at curbs for me since 1983 when we were both young and broke and building things on the same block of Meeting Street. and the world was considerably simpler and considerably harder at the same time. I got in. He handed me a coffee from the shop on King Street without saying anything, and I took it. And we drove in the direction of the office through the early morning streets of Charleston with the windows down and the harbor smell coming through, and neither of us feeling the need to fill the quiet with words that the moment did not require. When we crossed the bridge on East Bay, Jerry said, "How are you feeling?" "Like a man who has been waiting 3 weeks," I said, "and is ready to stop waiting." Jerry nodded. He drove. At the light on Broad Street, he said, "Martin, whatever happens in that room today, whatever Derek does, whatever she does, you did this right, start to finish. The way your father would have done it, and the way you'll be able to tell Eleanor you did it for the rest of your life." My throat tightened so fast it caught me off guard. I looked out the passenger window at the ironwork gates of St. Michael's Church, passing in the early light, and pressed my back teeth together until the tightening passed. "Thank you, Jerry," I said. "Don't thank me," he said gruffly. "Buy me dinner when it's over." The building was quiet when we arrived. The security guard nodded. The elevator was slow. The 8th floor was empty, and the conference room smelled of the coffee Tom Reeves had brought, and the faint, residual scent of the documents that had been laid out and reorganized on that table for 3 days. Raymond arrived at 8, Frank at 8:10, Marcus at 8:15, taking his position against the wall near the door, with the stillness of a man who has learned that his job in a room like this is to watch and wait and be ready. Tom Reeves came in last at 8:30 and took his seat at the far end of the table and opened his portfolio and uncapped his pen and looked like a man who had been sitting in boardrooms for 30 years and intended to sit in them for 30 more. I stood at the window for a few minutes before they arrived, looking out at the harbor. A container ship was moving slowly toward the channel, loaded low in the water, heading out past Fort Sumter toward the Atlantic. I had watched ships move through that channel from this window since we moved into this building, and I had never once gotten tired of it. I thought about Eleanor at her desk on Meeting Street in 1989, the green accountant's visor she wore when the light was bad, the way she would call across the office without looking up from the ledger. "Martin, the Beaufort contract is short by $800. Call them before 5. I thought about Derek at 8 years old, asleep on the office sofa, his sneakers still on his backpack on the floor beside him, his small face completely at peace in the way that children's faces are at peace when they feel entirely safe. I had loved that boy with everything I had. I still did. That was the thing that nobody tells you about this kind of betrayal. It does not stop the love. It just makes the love heavier. At 9:55, I heard the elevator. Derek came through the conference room door first. He was wearing a charcoal suit I had not seen before, a white shirt, a tie, and Callaway freight blue. He had dressed for an occasion. The suit was excellent, and it fit him well, and he wore it with the easy confidence of a man who believes the morning is going to go a particular way. Sabrina came in behind him, gray blazer hair pulled back, small gold earrings. She had the composed, unhurried manner of a woman who is prepared for every contingency and is confident in her preparation. She looked around the room with the quick, assessing glance of someone cataloging who was present. Raymond, Frank, Marcus against the wall, Tom at the far end, Jerry in the corner chair, and something moved across her face for just a fraction of a second before the composure closed back over it, like water closing over a stone. Derek looked at me across the conference table and smiled the smile he has been practicing for months. Open, reasonable, the patient warmth of a son who is doing a difficult thing out of love. I looked at my son, the charcoal suit, the Callaway freight blue tie, the face that had his mother's eyes and my stubbornness and 38 years of a life that I had watched from the beginning. I thought about the sneakers, the backpack, the small face at peace. Then I sat down and I straightened the paper in front of me, and I looked at Raymond and I said, "Let's begin." 3 weeks of silence, 3 weeks of watching and waiting and saying nothing. Before I reveal what Martin brought into that boardroom and what happened the moment Derek opened that folder, comment "ready" so I know you're still with me. Some details here are fictional, shaped to carry a truth worth sitting with. If this isn't the story for you, now is a good time to step away. For everyone staying, hold on. Raymond placed a folder in front of every person at the table. Navy blue, thick. The Callaway freight logo embossed on the cover, which I had asked him to include because this was still my company, and I intended everyone in the room to remember that while they read what was inside. Derek picked his up immediately. He opened it to the first page, and I watched his eyes move across the header, and I watched the expression on his face do something complicated. Not collapse, not yet. Just shift like a man who has walked into a room expecting one thing and found another, and has not yet decided what to do with the difference. Sabrina did not open hers immediately. She set it on the table in front of her, and placed both hands flat on the cover and looked at me. Her face was the composed, assessing face she had worn coming through the door. It did not change, but her hands pressed down on the folder with a pressure that was slightly too deliberate to be casual. "I'm going to walk through the contents in order," I said. My voice came out the way I had trained it to come out in difficult meetings, level, unhurried, with the particular quality of a man who has already decided how the meeting ends and is simply managing the time between now and then. "I'll ask that everyone hold questions until I've finished each section." I nodded to Raymond. "Section 1, Raymond said, opening his own copy. Harborview Rehabilitation Center, May 13th. External parking lot camera obtained through formal written records. Request submitted by this office to Harborview's legal department on May 15th. Response received May 16th. Chain of custody fully documented, fully admissible." He turned his laptop to face the room and pressed play. The footage ran 47 seconds. Timestamp 10:47:23. A man in a dark jacket coming through the main entrance doors, moving with the unhurried stride of someone comfortable with a decision, getting into a silver sedan, driving away. The clip ended. The room was quiet. Derek was looking at the frozen frame on Raymond's laptop screen. His jaw was working slowly, as if he was chewing on a sentence he had prepared and had just discovered did not fit the moment. Section 2. Raymond continued without pausing. Magnolia Crest Memory and Care, North Charleston. Reservation made April 28th. Deposit of $500 paid by credit card, registered to Sabrina Ann Calloway. He placed a printed document on the table, the booking confirmation, the notes field visible at the bottom. I direct the board's attention to the notes field. Tom Reeves leaned forward and read it. His expression did not change, but something behind his eyes went very still. Frank slid a copy toward Derek without being asked. Derek read the notes field. His face went a color I had not seen before, not pale, not red, a grayish in-between that made him look suddenly younger and suddenly much older at the same time. He looked at Sabrina. She was reading her own copy. She did not look up. Section 3, Raymond said, Capacity Assessment Correspondence. He laid two documents side by side. On the left, email correspondence between Sabrina Calloway and Dr. Philip Crane of Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, dated 3 weeks ago. Dr. Crane has no professional relationship with Martin. Calloway has never examined Martin Calloway and prepared a preliminary capacity assessment letter based solely on a written description provided by Mrs. Sabrina Calloway for a fee of $3,000. He let that number sit in the air for a moment. On the right, the formal neuropsychological assessment conducted by Dr. Sandra Okafor of the Medical University of South Carolina, completed May 27th. Dr. Okafor administered the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, a standardized 30-point screening tool used in clinical and legal proceedings nationwide. Martin Calloway scored 29 out of 30. Dr. Okafor's letter states, and I quote directly, that there are no indicators of executive function decline and no impairment of capacity for complex decision-making. Raymond paused. Dr. Okafor also states that Dr. Crane's conclusions are, in her professional opinion, unsupported by any documented examination. Derek's hand, which had been resting flat on the table beside his folder, curled slowly into a fist. "Dad," he said. His voice had lost the warm, prepared quality it had worn coming through the door. It was quieter now, younger. "Dad, I can explain the Crane correspondence that was Sabrina's. I didn't know she was Derek." My voice came out low and very final. "Sit down." He stopped talking. He sat back. He looked at his hands. Section 4. Frank said, taking his cue without being prompted. He stood and moved to the head of the table with the focused energy of a man who has been waiting 3 weeks for this moment. Voss Consulting, LLC. Registered in Wilmington, Delaware. Sole operator Nora Voss. I am going to walk through 3 contracts in chronological order. Frank walked through all 3. He presented the fee markups with the market comparisons, the absent deliverables, On the first two contracts, the wire transfer records showing $700,000 moved from Callaway Freight's operating account in Charleston to a TD Bank account in Savannah, Georgia. He noted that the transfer of funds across state lines using electronic wire communication for the purpose of executing a fraudulent scheme constitutes wire fraud under Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 1343, which is a federal matter handled by the Department of Justice. He noted that the third contract for $280,000 had been signed by Derek Callaway in excess of the $50,000 authorization limit specified in the limited power of attorney, rendering the contract voidable, and the associated wire transfer, which had completed on Friday, potentially recoverable through federal clawback proceedings. When Frank finished, Derek's face had moved past the grayish in-between to something that was simply undone. He was looking at the table in front of him, not at me, not at Sabrina, not at anyone. His hands were still on the folder, and they were shaking. "Dad," he said barely above a whisper, "I didn't know about the markups. I swear to you, I didn't know what Nora was." "We'll get to what you knew," I said quietly. "Not yet." Raymond stood. He reached into his briefcase and removed a laptop. He set it at the end of the table and connected it to the display screen on the wall. The screen came to life. "The final exhibit," Raymond said. His voice was very measured and very still. An internal file recovered from the Callaway Freight Solutions email server under lawful written authorization from Martin Callaway as company owner, provided by the company's IT department. The file was stored in a folder within the email account registered to Sabrina Callaway under the Callaway Freight domain. He pressed a key. The display screen filled with a document index, 47 files, 4 categories separated by digital tabs. Every document title visible on the first page contained one name, Derek Callaway. At the top of the screen in the folder label field, 2 words in plain text. Exit strategy, D. The sound Derek made was not a word. It was the sound a person makes when the floor drops out from under something they had believed was solid, a short exhaled syllable of pure, uncomprehending shock that he cut off almost immediately by pressing the back of his hand against his mouth. He turned to Sabrina. She was looking at the screen. Her face had finally completely changed. Sabrina moved first. Not Derek, not Raymond, not me. Sabrina, who had sat with her hands flat on the closed folder for the entire meeting, who had not opened it when everyone else did, who had maintained the composed and assessing face of a woman who had prepared for every contingency. Sabrina moved first, and she moved with the deliberate economy of someone executing a plan she had already rehearsed. She reached into the inside pocket of her gray blazer. She removed her phone. She placed it on the conference table in front of her face-up screen, dark. Then she slid it across the table toward Raymond Holt with a single smooth motion, the way you slide something to someone when the gesture itself is the statement. Raymond caught it with one hand and looked at it, and then looked at her. "Everything on that device is relevant to this matter," Sabrina said. Raymond did not open it. He set it on the table and looked at Marcus Webb, who produced an evidence bag from his briefcase and sealed the device inside it, documenting the transfer on a chain of custody form he had prepared in advance. The phone would go to the DA's office this afternoon, under proper procedure, not as a gift from a defendant, but as a piece of physical evidence with a documented and unbroken chain of possession. Her voice was clear and unhurried, with the practiced steadiness of someone who had rehearsed this sentence too. "I am prepared to provide full cooperation with any investigative or prosecutorial proceeding that follows from today's disclosures. I want that documented beginning now." 4 seconds of absolute silence. Then Derek said her name. He said it the way a person says the name of someone they have just seen do something that has permanently reordered their understanding of who that person is. Not loud, not angry. Something far worse than angry. The flat, uncomprehending tone of a man who has just had the ground removed from under 48 months of his life. Sabrina, she did not look at him. She kept her eyes on Raymond with the focused intentionality of a woman who has decided that the only direction available to her is forward, and that looking sideways at the person sitting next to her is a direction she cannot afford. "Sabrina!" Derek's voice cracked on the second syllable. His hands, which had been shaking on the folder, went completely still, the stillness of shock, not composure. "Sabrina, look at me." She looked at Raymond instead. "I would like to begin the cooperation documentation as soon as possible," she said. I have additional materials at home that are relevant to the Voss consulting arrangement and to the correspondence with Dr. Crane. I can have them available within 24 hours. Derek pushed back from the table so suddenly his chair scraped the floor. He stood up, and the sound of it brought every eye in the room to him. His face was the color of chalk. His hands were pressed flat against the edge of the table, and they were shaking again harder now, and his voice when he found it was raw and stripped of every prepared quality it had carried into the room 90 minutes ago. "You were going to hand me to them," he said, not a question. The words came out with the terrible clarity of a man who is assembling something he does not want to assemble but cannot stop assembling now that the pieces are in front of him. That folder, Exit Strategy D, that was, "You were always going to hand me to them if it fell apart." He pressed his hands harder against the table's edge. "D is for Derek. I am D. You labeled me like a contingency." Sabrina said nothing. Her hands were folded now in her lap below the table line, and I could see from where I sat that they were not entirely steady either. But her face held. Whatever was happening in her hands, her face held, and I understood in that moment the particular and terrible discipline of a person who has decided that survival requires them to feel nothing in public. Derek made a sound that was not crying and was not quite not crying. A sharp, compressed exhale through his nose, the sound of a man shutting a door on something so fast it catches on the frame. He sat back down. He put both hands over his face. He pressed them there. I watched my son sit with his hands over his face in the conference room of the company he had grown up in, and I felt something move through me that I did not have a name for and did not try to name. It was not satisfaction. It was not relief. It was not even grief in any form I had felt before. It was the particular weight of watching someone you love arrive at a truth they cannot walk back from, and knowing that your love for them does not change the truth and never could. Tom Reeves spoke. "I move that the board suspend Derek Calloway's operational authority as Chief Operating Officer of Callaway Freight Solutions, pending completion of the internal audit review and any applicable state or federal legal proceedings." His voice was measured and formal and completely without cruelty. The suspension to take effect immediately and to remain in place until further board action. Raymond looked around the table. All in favor. Every board member present voted in favor. Derek did not move his hands from his face. Jerry Sims, from his chair in the corner, looked at me across the room. He had been there since the beginning and had not said a word and had not been asked to say a word, and he looked at me now with the eyes of a man who has known me for 40 years and understands that there are moments when the only thing a friend can offer is to be present for them. I looked back at him and nodded once. Not victory, not relief, just done. Raymond would deliver the device to the DA's office that afternoon. Everything was documented. Everything was on record. Marcus from the wall caught my eye. He gave a small nod. That was enough. Sabrina stood. She straightened her blazer with both hands, the automatic gesture of a woman reclaiming composure through physical action, and looked at Raymond. "When can we begin the formal cooperation process?" "My office," Raymond said. "This afternoon, 3 o'clock. She nodded and picked up her bag and walked toward the door with the measured steps of a woman who will not allow herself to hurry, even now, even here, even with her phone in an evidence bag and her husband's hand still over his face at the conference table. At the door, she stopped. I do not know what she was going to say. She opened her mouth and closed it again, and whatever had been there did not make it out, and she left. Derek sat at the table for a long time after she was gone. The room emptied slowly around him. Tom Reeves pausing to put a hand briefly on my shoulder, Frank collecting his documents with quiet efficiency, Marcus folding the evidence bag into his briefcase. Eventually, it was just Derek and me. He took his hands away from his face. His eyes were red, and his face was undone in the way that faces are undone when every structure holding them together has been removed at once. He looked at me across the table, across the company we had both grown up in, him sleeping on the sofa and me keeping the lights on, and he said the only thing left to say. "Dad," he said, "I'm sorry." His voice broke completely on the second word, and he did not try to hold it together. I looked at my son, the red eyes, the undone face, the Callaway Freight blue tie slightly loosened now the tie he had chosen this morning because he thought today was the day he was going to inherit something. "I know you are," I said, and I meant it. That was the hardest part. I meant every word of it. Raymond found me on the 8th floor balcony at 12:30. I had been standing there since the last board member left, looking out at the Charleston harbor with both hands on the railing and the May sun warm on my face and the smell of salt water and diesel from the channel below, doing what it always does, which is remind me that the world is considerably larger than whatever room I just came out of. Raymond came and stood beside me without being asked. He looked at the water for a moment before he spoke. Frank's audit report goes to the DA's office Monday morning, he said. The wire transfer records the Voss contracts, the interstate routing documentation, all of it. The U.S. Attorney's Office handles federal wire fraud cases in this district. They are thorough and they are not slow. Nora Voss, I said. Marcus has people watching the hotel on King Street. She doesn't know. The moment the DA files there will be a federal hold request. She won't be going back to Savannah on her own timeline. Raymond paused. The $280,000 from Friday's transfer will be subject to federal clawback proceedings. Recovering the prior $700,000 will take longer. It depends on what's in Nora Voss's accounts and how quickly the federal freeze can be executed. And Derek's fro baspandisambor. Raymond was quiet for a moment, in the way he is quiet when the answer is true but not simple. That depends entirely on the cooperation he provides. Sabrina's phone gives the prosecutors a substantial head start on the case against both of them. If Derek comes in immediately fully and documents everything Sabrina directed him to do, the Voss contracts, the Magnolia Crest arrangement, the Crane correspondence, the U.S. attorney will likely focus primary prosecution on Sabrina and Nora Voss. He looked at me. Derek's culpability is real. But there is a meaningful legal distinction between the person who architected a scheme and the person who was used to execute it without fully understanding what he was executing. I looked out at the container ship I had watched leaving the channel that morning. It was gone now somewhere past Fort Sumter, heading into open water. He understood enough, I said. Yes, Raymond said. He did, and he will have to account for that. But the degree of that accounting is still to be determined, Derek called at 3:15. I was back at my desk, the harbor still visible through the window, a cup of coffee going cold beside me because I had forgotten it was there. His name on my phone screen looked the same as it always had. Same font, same contact photo, a picture from 3 Christmases ago at the house on East Battery. Derek laughing at something out of frame, his face completely unguarded, I answered. Dad. His voice was different from the boardroom, lower, stripped of everything it had been wearing for months. He sounded like a man who has had every prepared thing taken away from him and is left with only what was underneath. Are you going to press charges yourself? Separate from the DA? That is not my decision anymore, I said. I gave the evidence to Raymond, and Raymond gave it to the authorities. What happens next happens through proper channels. A long pause. I could hear him breathing. She told me you were losing it, he said. Not defensive, just reporting. The way a man reports something that he now understands differently than he did when it was told to him. She said you were exhausted, that you weren't making clear decisions, that Mom needed more than we could manage at home, and that you were too proud and too tired to admit it. Another pause. She said she was doing it for the family. And you believed her, I said. I did. His voice broke slightly on the second word, then steadied. I believed her because I wanted to. Because it was easier than looking at what she was actually doing, and because he stopped, started again. Because I wanted the company, Dad. I want to be honest about that. I wanted what you built, and I was willing to tell myself that wanting it was the same as deserving it. The honesty of it hit me harder than the betrayal had. Betrayal I had seen coming, had documented, had prepared for. This my son telling me the truth about himself, with nothing left to protect, this I had not prepared for. Derek, I said, call Raymond's office tomorrow morning, first thing. Tell them you want to cooperate fully. Tell them everything in order without managing it. That is the only thing I can tell you to do right now. Okay. A pause. Is Mom... His voice gave out completely on the word. He tried again. Is Mom okay? Your mother, I said carefully, is the strongest person I know. She has been since the day I met her, and that has not changed by 1 degree. You knew that once. You will have to find your way back to knowing it. He did not respond for a long moment. When he did, his voice was so quiet, I almost missed it. I know, he said. I sat with the dead call for a moment after he hung up. Then I called Joyce. She picked up on the first ring. How did it go? It went, I said. Martin. Her voice was sharp with the love that Joyce expresses as impatience. How are you? I'm sitting in my office at 3:30 in the afternoon with a cold cup of coffee, and my son just called me and told me the truth about himself, I said. I don't have a word for what I am. Joyce was quiet for 4 seconds. Then, come for dinner Sunday. Both of you, I'll make the pot roast. It was such a Joyce answer, practical, warm, utterly without ceremony, that I laughed. A short, surprised laugh that I had not expected, and that felt after the day I had just had like something my chest genuinely needed. Sunday, I said. Yes. Raymond came back to my office at 4 with the trust documents. We sat across from each other at the conference table for 40 minutes while he walked me through the restructured Callaway Revocable Living Trust. The Spousal Protection Trust provision ensured that Eleanor's share of all marital assets, the house on East Battery, her portion of the Callaway freight holdings, the investment accounts could not be transferred, encumbered, or accessed without her direct written consent and independent legal counsel. It was ironclad, and it was hers. The fraud forfeiture clause stated that any beneficiary of the trust who was found by a court of competent jurisdiction to have engaged in fraud, financial exploitation, or abuse directed at either grantor would automatically forfeit their beneficial interest, with those assets redistributing to a charitable foundation of Eleanor's choosing. The successor trustee was no longer Derek Callaway. It was a trust company Raymond had worked with for 15 years, professional, independent, with no existing relationship to any member of the family. I signed it at 4:47. I drove home through the early evening streets of Charleston with the windows down and Stevie Wonder on the radio, the same station Eleanor always has, oncoming through the speakers because I had tuned to it without thinking and had not changed it. The harbor was pink and gold on my left as I crossed the bridge on East Bay. The wisteria along our iron fence was still in bloom, purple and extravagant in the evening light. Eleanor was on the front steps. Not on the porch, not inside, on the front steps, sitting in the evening light with her hands folded in her lap, and the garnet bracelet catching the last of the sun, watching the street, the way she had been watching things she was waiting for her entire life. She stood when she saw my car, slowly, one hand on the railing, both feet finding the step before moving to the next, the careful and dignified way that is entirely hers now. I parked. I got out. I walked up the front path and up the steps, and I stood in front of my wife on the front porch of our house on East Battery, and she looked at my face with the quick, complete attention she has been giving my face since 1980. Tell me, she said. So I did. We sat on the front porch until the harbor went dark. Eleanor had brought out 2 glasses of sweet tea without being asked, the way she does things that she has decided need doing, and we sat in the wicker chairs with the evening air coming off the water, and I told her everything that had happened, from the moment Raymond and I had stood on the 8th floor balcony at noon until the moment I had pulled into the driveway 40 minutes ago. She listened the way Eleanor listens, completely without interruption, her hands folded around her glass, her eyes on my face, absorbing each piece of information with the same focused attention she gave to freight manifests in 1989 and quarterly reports in 2003, and every hard thing that had required her full intelligence in the 41 years between then and now. When I got to the part about Derek, the phone call, the stripped voice, the sentence about wanting the company, Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment. Not long, 4 or 5 seconds, her lashes dark against her cheeks, her lips pressed together. Then she opened them and looked back at me, and there was something in her expression that was not forgiveness and was not condemnation, but lived in the complicated territory between them, the territory that only parents who love their children honestly are ever asked to inhabit. He told you the truth, she said. He did. That's something, she said. It's not enough, but it's something. She was quiet for a moment, looking out at the dark harbor. A light moved slowly across the water, a boat heading north toward the Cooper River, its running lights steady and small in the distance. Sabrina, she said, not a question. Just the name set down between us like an object she was examining. Sabrina will face federal charges, I said. Conspiracy to commit wire fraud at minimum, potentially more depending on what's on the phone, she handed to Raymond. Eleanor nodded slowly. She was very clever, she said, with the particular tone she uses for things that are true and unpleasant simultaneously. I want to be honest about that. She came into this family, and she read every weakness in it, and she used every one of them. A pause. She read Derek's ambition. She read your loyalty to him. She read my illness like a blueprint. She turned to look at me directly. She was wrong about one thing. What was that? She thought my illness made me smaller, Eleanor said. Her voice was even and unhurried and entirely certain. She thought Parkinson's was a diminishment. She looked at my hands and she saw the tremor, and she built her entire plan around the assumption that a woman whose hands shake cannot be a woman who understands what is happening around her. The corners of her mouth moved, not quite a smile, but the shape that precedes one. She was extraordinarily wrong about that. I reached across the space between the wicker chairs and took her hand. It trembled against my palm. It always trembles. It has trembled for 14 months, and it will tremble for the rest of the time we have together. And I have learned in those 14 months that the tremor tells you nothing about the steadiness of the person it belongs to. Adore, I said. Don't, she said, but gently, the gentle version she uses when she knows I am about to say something true that she is not quite ready to receive yet. Not yet. I need a minute. So, I held her trembling hand in the dark and waited, and the harbor made its small nighttime sounds below the rooftops, and the wisteria along the fence breathed its evening smell into the air, and Eleanor Calloway sat in her chair and took her minute, and I did not rush her. When she was ready, she squeezed my hand. Okay, she said. Now. I reached into my jacket pocket with my free hand and took out the folded piece of paper. I had been carrying it since Tuesday night, and it was soft at the creases from being opened and closed. I want to read you something, I said. She looked at the paper in my hand. Something shifted in her face, recognition maybe, or the particular alertness of a woman who has learned to pay attention when her husband does something unexpected. I unfolded it and read it to her. I read her name at the top. I read the freight manifests she had checked by hand in the first 3 years. The number of them, the errors she had caught that would have cost us contracts we could not afford to lose. I read about the clients she had called herself during the months I was on the road and could not reach them. I read about 1991, the year she had renegotiated the insurance rates, the $40,000 that had stayed in the company, because she had spent 2 weeks on the phone with carriers who thought they were dealing with a small operation that would accept whatever they offered. I read about the 2 years she had worked without salary, the specific months, the amounts she had deferred. I read about the Beaufort contract she had caught short by $800 and the Collins account she had restructured when the original terms would have been ruinous, and the year she had stayed until 10 o'clock every Friday for 11 months because the quarterly close was a disaster, and she was the only person who could find the source of the error. I read all of it, every line, out loud on the front porch of the house on East Battery, with the harbor dark beyond the rooftops and the wisteria moving in the night air. When I finished, Eleanor was looking at her glass of sweet tea. Her chin was up and her jaw was set, and her eyes were very bright, and she was not going to cry, which I knew because Eleanor Calloway had already cried once this week and had decided that was her allocation. You didn't need to write that down, she said. Her voice was rough at the edge and controlled in the middle. I needed to read it out loud, I said, in front of you, so you knew I knew. She looked at me, then full on with the eyes that are still and have always been the sharpest thing about her. I knew you knew, she said. I know you did, I said. I read it anyway. She took a long breath. Then she reached over and took the paper from my hand and folded it along its original creases and held it in her lap. We stayed on the porch until the 11 o'clock bells rang from St. Michael's Church, which you can hear from East Battery on quiet nights when the wind is right, which it was. Then we went inside and turned off the lights and went upstairs, and I lay in the dark listening to Eleanor breathe the way I have done on difficult mornings and difficult nights for 41 years. And this time, the breathing settled me completely, and I slept. In the morning, I made coffee and brought a cup upstairs before Eleanor was awake, and I set it on her nightstand the way I have done on the mornings that matter. And when she woke and saw it, she did not say anything, and I did not say anything, and that was entirely sufficient. We left the house at 9:15. Eleanor wore the navy blazer again, and the pearl earrings and the garnet bracelet. She walked down the front steps with one hand on the railing carefully, and without hurrying, which is the only way she walks now, and which I have come to understand is not a diminishment, but a different kind of precision, the precision of a woman who has decided that if each step requires her full attention, she will give it her full attention and not 1 degree less. The drive to Harborview took 22 minutes. We did not fill it with conversation. The radio played the same station it always does, and a woman sang something I did not know the name of, and Eleanor hummed along quietly for the last 4 minutes of the drive, which told me she was all right, which was the only information I needed. I parked in the lot. I turned off the engine. I came around to the passenger side and opened the door and held out my hand, and Eleanor placed her trembling hand in mine and stepped out into the May morning with the harbor smell on the air and the palmetto palms moving gently along the parking lot perimeter. We walked through the automatic doors together. Patrice Monroe was at the nurse's station. She looked up when we came in, and I watched something cross her face, recognition and something warmer than recognition. The expression of a woman who had made a phone call 17 days ago that she had hoped would set something right and was now watching across a rehabilitation center lobby evidence that it had. She came around the station and shook Eleanor's hand. She said, "Mrs. Calloway, it's very good to see you." She said it to Eleanor directly without looking at me for confirmation, which is exactly the way she had spoken to Eleanor the first time, and which Eleanor noticed and appreciated in the small nod she gave in return. Then Patrice looked at me and nodded once, the brief professional nod of one person acknowledging to another that something has been resolved. Eleanor's therapist came and collected her for the session. Eleanor turned at the corridor entrance and looked back at me. She did not wave. She simply looked the way she looks at things she has decided to keep, and then she went in. I walked to the waiting area. I stood in front of the row of blue institutional chairs along the window, the third chair from the left, the one Eleanor had been sitting in on May 13th when I had come through those doors and found her watching them, the way a person watches something they have been watching for a long time. I sat down in it. I put my hands on my knees. I looked at the door. The morning light came through the windows and lay across the floor in long, flat bars that moved so slowly you could not see them moving and could only notice after a while that they had moved. The rehabilitation center made its quiet sounds around me, a therapist counting in a corridor, the soft chime of an elevator, a television somewhere playing the morning news. I had a phone in my pocket and a company that still needed running, and a trust document signed the previous afternoon, and a son who was going to call Raymond's office this morning, and a daughter-in-law who would be in a federal attorney's office by the end of the week, and an aunt in a hotel on King Street who did not yet know what was waiting for her. I sat in the chair, and I looked at the door, and I waited for my wife. She had sat in this chair for 3 hours and 17 minutes because someone had put her here and walked away. I intended to sit in it for as long as it took. She built half of everything I have. The least I can do is be in the chair. I am 68 years old. I built a company with my bare hands and the woman I love, and I almost lost both of them, not to illness, not to time, but to family betrayal that lived inside my own front door. This is my family story, and I am not proud of every chapter in it. I let things go too long. I gave the benefit of the doubt when I should have given attention. If there is one thing I would tell you, don't do what I did. Don't wait for the wound to become a scar before you address it. God has a way of placing the right people in the right moments. Patrice Monroe picked up the phone. Raymond answered on the first ring. Eleanor never stopped being exactly who she has always been. I did not save this family story. I just finally stopped looking away from it. Check who has authority over the things that matter. Check who has access. Check who has been positioned close to the people you love most. Then protect what you built, not just with trust, but with paper. Family betrayal does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives in a navy blue folder on a Tuesday afternoon. If this story moved, you leave a comment below. I read everyone. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't yet, subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Thank you for staying until the end. The stories ahead contain some fictional elements created purely to illuminate truths worth hearing. If that's not the journey for you, no hard feelings. Choose what serves you best. But if you're staying, I'll see you in the next one.